Welcome everyone to a special edition of Story Trading. We got Bob Ferris, CEO of VTSI here, but first a quick disclaimer, Story Trading is not an investment advisor and investing in securities involves significant risk of loss. We have a short 30-minute presentation, so just going to fly through this. You can go to storytrading.com to sign up for upcoming apps. VTSI is a VIP pick. You can go to our website to see all the VIP picks. Bob Ferris has been here before. On January 24th is when I was in Miami with Mark Gomes, and we had this special live event. And since then, we've been tracking it as a VIP pick. The stock's about up 75% since then. Since we're short on time, I'm just going to introduce what happened here with VTSI with earnings. And Bob, if you want to add something later about earnings, you can do that. But just reported last week, 5.3 million revenue, 3.1 million gross profit. Adjusted EBITDA 1 million, net income 529,000, 5 cents per share, 23.8 million cash, and a record 17 million backlog, which stood out. Now, I just want to show you this little chart. When you look at the quarterly numbers, you see it's a little bit bumpy, but there's a staircase pattern. The growth is not obvious, and I just wanted to point this out to everyone. If you use 12 months trailing revenue to look at fundamentals, it's much more clear what the story is. So just everyone, something to appreciate there. And another thing I want to let people know about is Bob talked about this, the STEP program with recurring revenue. That's something that hopefully in the future will smooth this chart out even on a quarterly basis. So with that, I'm going to stop my screen share and welcome Bob. You there?
I am. Thanks so much, Ben.
Did you get all that? Hello?
Hello, can you hear me okay?
I hear you. I said, did I get all that right, that introduction?
I think so, yes, that sounded good. I think since we have a short period of time, best is to jump into Q&A.
So, got a few questions, and then if there's time, we'll see if we can open it up. So, the first thing that I wanted to ask about is actually, let me share my screen real quick one more time, just so people are not familiar. After Q1, you had a great earnings report. The stock flew and you raised $18 million. I just wanted an update on that. I'm not sure if you specifically commented on the conference call, but just if you can add some color, like how's that money being used? Anything you can tell us about that?
So yeah, during this last earnings call, which comes just a couple short months after raising those funds, there was no comment made about the use of those funds. So I would say that there's been nothing released on the utility of those funds at this time.
Okay, we did notice it's publicly listed, on out there that there have been 16 new hires and you have a few open positions. So I don't know, in general, if you can kind of comment, if you were to use those funds, theoretically, like how would you use that? How would you put that money to work? Is it for business that you think you'd get immediately, or is this, would you use that for an investment for possible business in the future? Can you just kind of give some color how you might use those funds?
Sure. So, and it really flows well with what was discussed on this last earnings call. And if you noticed, probably the most recurring word used, if there's one word that was used more than any other, was probably scale. And so I would say that that's definitely an indicator. So, we would be looking at using funds to grow, for growth, for scale. And those are some of the comments that we had when the funds were raised was, how do we take advantage of our opportunities and grow the company, towards profitability, continued profitability and growing profitability, which is really obviously an indication of how much we're contributing to society is profitability. So ultimately, even, though sometimes it takes some money to make some money, but yeah, I think, if there's one theme of this last earnings report, I think it would be the idea that we are in the process of scaling the company, and growing into the opportunities that seem pretty abundant for us right now. Thanks.
Okay, that's helpful. Is there any kind of goal or a color you can give in terms of that scale? Like once you finish, and I don't know, let's assume once you finish using this money over whatever period of time, right? Will that increase your capacity 50%, 100%? Any kind of color you can give on that?
Not at this time. I really can't get into those specifics, but I look forward to a point in time when I can get more specific along to that granularity.
Okay. All right, cool. Wanted to move over to talk about international opportunities. In regards to COVID and now reemergence of Delta, how's that impacting things? If you can get an update on that.
Yeah, international is a real it's a real mixed bag for us. On some levels, we're seeing some of the biggest opportunities we've ever seen on the international scope. On the other side of the house, where COVID-19 is a on again, off again blocker for our international side and business development on international. So we've been able to get international travel done, but with the resurgent with the Delta variant, and it's every day we are not sure, and to the point of in fact, I recently had an international trip, and we're doing COVID testing, and we're doing things just because we don't know if the policies will change in the next 24 hours. And when you're in the middle of international travel, you often can't just go and easily get a COVID test. So COVID-19 is complicating the logistics of international business for us and probably about everyone. But yet we're seeing there's pent-up demand in the international side. I think partly because of COVID-19 has generated some extraordinary opportunity on the international landscape that we're eager to take advantage of. But it's very frustrating to think we have a green light, and then we have a red light, and then we have a green light, and then we have a red light, and then tomorrow we don't know if it'll be green or red when it comes to travel specifically. So
okay, just sticking on the international theme, I don't know if you can see my screen. Are you able to see that, Bob?
Yes. Yeah.
So this was a tweet that you guys posted a few days ago, and I wasn't completely clear on what it was. It's talking about Taiwan Minister of the Interior recently visiting a V300, and discussions are in place to possibly increase the quantity of training. Is that related to Virta specifically, or what can you tell us about this tweet?
So yeah, I mean, I think we're in a total of 37 countries worldwide, and that being one of them. And that was a very encouraging public relations effort that client put through, where that's what we really like to see, is when leaders of a country embrace serious training and effective training methodologies and get behind it. We're kind of shocked that this isn't happening more. If you're a politician in a country and your job is governance, and you have a way to say, hey guys, I'm doing my job. Look, I'm enhancing training for the people who are allowed to take lives of the public and of suspects, and I'm helping them do their job better. Why would you not want to do that? There's so many issues that are polarizing. One of the few that are not polarizing is the idea that police officers and the military needs to be highly trained, since they're entrusted with lethal decisions. And we're kind of shocked that what you see there in Taiwan is not almost universal, that politicians are not drawn to our product as moth to a flame. And in some cases they are. We're just kind of shocked that it's not more commonplace, because it just makes too much sense. It shows them doing a great job for their constituents, which is usually difficult for them to do. And it just makes a heck of a lot of sense. So I preach this from the hilltops every chance I can. And any politicians that are listening to this eventually here, or that anyone has on speed dial, this should be the first thing we talk about with them. And there should be a lot of encouragement of, help us help them. And, this is exactly the sort of technology that I think people can get around and say, okay, this is exactly the sort of thing we should be doing. This is one of the good purposes of government, is to, when you entrust people to keep the peace, train them so they properly keep the peace and don't make mistakes, and and as limited as possible, that have lethal consequences, and then can lead to riots, can lead to disenfranchising part of the population, can lead to so many negative consequences that we really can do better than what we've been doing. So really glad to see that tweet. And we do have that's just one example, but we're in 37 different countries, and always like to see our partners in other countries get government leaders involved in the conversation of better training in the public space. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's move on to military opportunity. I know you can't talk specifics, but there's been a lot of hints and speculation about a large military opportunity. So instead of asking you about the specifics or anything short term, I was wondering if you could give a color, like let's say 2-3 years out, right? I want to get a sense of the relative opportunity of military versus police, right? What kind of does Virta? Because so far I always thought of Virta as a police training thing, and I've been becoming more aware of the military over the last several months. So 2-3 years out, what's the opportunity? Is this going to be is it much bigger for military than police? What's your thinking on that?
Yeah, I like the way you phrase that, and you're giving me an opening to talk about some things that I'm able to, because I do have limitations on what I can discuss in a public forum, in a semi-private forum. So I think the easiest way to think of the military opportunity is many years ago, there was a company that did a lot of military firearm simulation, and they were publicly traded, and their numbers were available. The gross revenue numbers were available. Now there are some differences between their approach and their technology, and their patents versus Virta patents and things like that. So it's not a one-to-one relationship. I think our gross margins are much higher than their gross margins, and that has to do with particulars of how they operate that I won't get into, and that some of that's just my opinion. But the one thing that is nice is that their numbers were posted publicly, and I think their numbers were around about $100 million a year in gross revenue generated through firearm training simulation. That's essentially the weapon simulators, which for us is obviously we do a lot of drop-in recoil kits. And that's accessories, and that's simulator hardware itself, and software and content, and all of those different components. So they were running at about 100 million a year, and that was many years ago. Now that was their worldwide revenue. So part of that would have been US military forces, part of that would have been international forces. But I think that that's about the most accurate way to give some idea of scope and scale when you look at military, because we're not going to do every military simulation. We don't do helicopter simulation, for example, and we don't do jet simulators. So yes, the market for military simulation is quite enormous, and worldwide is obviously massive. But looking at sort of a similar type company to where Virta's headed, what could that sort of look like when it's more fully realized? I think it's 100 million plus just on the military market itself.
That's really helpful. What was the name of the company that you mentioned?
So the company name in which those numbers were released publicly would have been, if you go way back, it would be VTS. And I believe they were public at a certain point. That goes back about 30 years roughly, I want to say. And then The other would be Megit company, and they were a division in Megit, but they had their announcements of income such that you could look into their annual reports and figure out what portion of revenue was related to firearm simulation training. And I think that would be MEGGITT.
Okay, great. That's very helpful. All right, I just got like two more, and then if we have time, hopefully I'm going to ask Kevin Crawford. He has a couple questions. I'm going to ask him to ask if we have time. So last two I have, regarding federal funding and these bills that are going through the House of Representatives, I'm wondering, are you looking at that, and do you see anything different coming out of there that could, this year that could impact your business going forward?
Yeah, I think the most astute investors are looking at that carefully. And I think I speak for all simulation companies in our market when I say that at no time have we ever seen Congress more interested in looking at reforming and working on language to boost training within law enforcement in America. I don't think it's ever been, the tempo has never been this high. Now, what will ultimately happen, I don't really have a good prediction for right now, but I've never seen this much intensity on, okay, guys, how do we get it right? What do we need to do as far as what's the right language for training to be put into the bill, and what do we need to do to really get to what we're trying to achieve here in America with having a really professional, well-trained, well-prepared police force to make the very best decision in tough situations. And I think that that is a fever pitch right now, unlike we've ever seen. What will result, I don't know, but I do think that there's a lot of determination to get something through that would be a strong police reform. And that could occur in the next few months, and that could have a cascade impact, a market level impact on Virta, as well as some other companies in our space.
Cool, awesome, very helpful. I do have a couple others, but I'm gonna go to Kevin Crawford now, and if there's time, I'll come back to myself. So,
all
Kevin,
right, thanks, man.
Yep, you there?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Bob, I had a couple of follow-ups on Ben's questions about the investments in headcount and equipment and all that kind of stuff. Are we at a point where we can expect to grow the company with where we currently are, or do we expect further investment in headcount and equipment and all that sort of thing?
Thanks for that question, Kevin. It is, we try to tie very carefully our investment in headcount and equipment in either our immediate needs or our highly certain near-term opportunities. We've not been entirely the sort of company that will go spend big and hope that everything will work out, but having no real strong leads or any really strong prospects. That's not really, if you look at our history, you obviously see that's not the way we've built Virta. And so, but yes, I think that's about as good as I can answer that question as far as the way you asked it. So if that makes sense.
Kevin, oh, hold on.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob. I appreciate that. Going back again, following up on Ben's international question, are there plans or ways to bypass some of the COVID headwinds for international? Let's say Delta continues and stays around for 6 months, whatnot. Is the expectation that we just won't be able to deliver, or are there ways to get around that, work around that?
Yeah. Interesting question. This is the sort of thing that we are constantly trying to adapt to. And I do think there are ways around it. Somewhat, it's very client driven. So if the client is really at a desperate spot where they're done, they need to get a simulator purchased, but we have great digital assets to work with them on. And if we can't show up through travel restrictions, we can still land clients without that. It's really client specific. I do think that with the lifting of COVID-19 travel restrictions, is definitely going to allow it to be more universal, where more clients are willing to get things over the finish line. In the meantime, it is a matter of adaptability on what clients are open to getting things done, even in light of restrictions, and we're more than open to working that angle.
Got it. Thanks for that. And then following up on the police reform, from US perspective, we know there's some work being done, but what about internationally? I'm not too familiar with police market over there.
Yeah.
But surely they're at least thinking of some of the things that have happened in the US.
Yeah. Great point. And internationally, there is a lot of differences on the international side, some of which really actually help Virta. So for example, Mexico, we've sold a lot of simulators into Mexico, and frankly, they're a federalized law enforcement style country, whereas in America, we have to work with Customs and Border Protection on one side, and then we work with, maybe a San Diego Police Department, and then maybe, the Arizona State or Cal Post, or these different organizations. We have all of these various opportunities in the US, whereas Mexico, it's more a federalized police force, which frankly makes it many times easier. You don't have as many opportunities, but the opportunity you have that has larger budget and has more interest in doing a centralized systematic approach, which Virta is a great fit for, because Virta dominates, in America, we dominate the federal law enforcement. The major law enforcement agencies of America have all already selected Virta and continue to buy from us. So we've got a lot of things in our favor as far as going internationally. I would point out, though, that the other question that was asked about the U.S. federal funding for police and or the U.S. reform is a slightly different animal. And the best way I could explain it is, if, and this is a big if, okay, this is I hope Ben gave everyone the disclaimer on, projections and future events and all that good stuff. But if Congress were to say something like, you need certified simulation training or certified training, and you need X number of hours, and we are actually putting a minimum floor on training for police officers in America, you have to understand that could have many times beyond the effect of all of the international interest, because it's now an actual mandate versus a recommendation or a best practice, or our references getting in front of the right people, or Salesforce convincing the right person. To actually have somebody say, well, I have to have training, is a massive overnight change for an industry that affects, wouldn't just affect Virta, it affect other companies that are well positioned for that kind of change. I don't know if that's going to happen. I think it could have a lot of good effects to have something like that, to where there's a minimum level of training and maybe a standardized level of training, or at least certified training. Because not all training is created equal. I think that's extremely well understood in the marketplace, that there's great, effective, realistic training, and then there's very poor, check the box, leave person vulnerable to liability, leave the city vulnerable to lawsuit type training. And there's a big difference between those training, a big difference in cost sometimes, and a big difference in effort. And it takes a little bit of work to make sure you get the right type of training. So. But I do think that when it comes to reform, the U.S. domestic reform on policing could have an outsized impact on our company and companies like us versus international opportunities, which could be quite significant in coming years.
Got it. Yeah, and about mandatory training, I saw on a bill that was going to the House maybe end of July, that they were talking about mandated federal law officer training. And I was like, this is huge news. So
You
could
got
cover.
it. I mean, it's huge news if it comes through, right? And
Yeah,
if it
exactly.
comes through in a way that favors Virta or opens it up for Virta. I saw a chat message and I'll just answer it. Yes, we are actively lobbying what we're talking about.
Nice.
Got it. That was the last question, Ben. I'll toss it back to you.
All right,
Thanks, Bob.
great. We just got a couple minutes left, so I want to close it off with one question, Bob. In the last week's report, you mentioned 17 million backlog. I thought I heard live that you said that's something you expect to be filled the balance of the year, but I was looking at the transcript today and I couldn't find it. Can you maybe add some color what you
Yeah.
mean by that backlog and how long it'll take to fill that?
Yeah, I would. The 17 million backlog, it crisscrosses a lot of different items, and there's warranties that are embedded in that $17 million that might be 3 years into the future that we have no way of closing out in the next 4 quarters, just not even in available. So I think maybe the term was the majority of that would be converted, and then realize obviously our sales team is hard at work adding new items to the backlog to keep bringing sales orders in, and sales order immediately goes in the backlog the moment it comes in until it becomes recognized revenue. So no, there's there is no perfect, okay, $17 million of backlog, all of that money will flush through recognized revenue in the next 2 quarters or 3 quarters or 4 quarters. I would say no, that's not the case.
Okay, and just a follow up to that, if there were going to be some sort of optionality, like an upside kind of performance surprise for your company in the next 2 quarters, where would that be most likely to come from? In other words, what part of your business has the shortest sales cycles and also the shortest kind of lead times for you to produce it and get it shipped out there?
Interesting question. I mean, we've been working hard to bring the cycles down as short as we can, so that we're able to fill orders relatively fast. That's a tough question. I mean, just functionally, obviously, if we were to do any sort of licensing deal, but those are, there's no way of really predicting when something like that would happen. And as you can tell from our company, we don't generally do a lot of licensing. We do have a lot of IP that's quite valuable, but normally we're the company producing the product. So I suppose we are, our V300 flagship simulator is one of our larger items as far as dollars and cents goes, and probably a large shipment of V300 simulators would probably drive the top line in a pretty strong way. Or a large amount of recoil kits those would be 2 of the ways to have a pretty fast path to larger revenue. That's
awesome. I love that color. Bob, it's right against your 6:30 here. I know you got to go, so I appreciate your time. Thank you for squeezing us in, and we'll talk to you again in the future.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the thoughtful questions. Take care, everyone.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.